I'm healed now, and if I admit that I have a problem, that I mistreated you, then maybe all the people in my past that said you're the problem, maybe they're right.
I really believe that far more people struggle with that than they realize. I didn't even realize.
Right, it was a long time.
I was struggling with that.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan. We are so glad that you're here.
Yeah, we're in a special series this week, and we can't wait to get into it. Well, kind of can't wait to it, but
yeah, it's a little bit more difficult, and
can't wait to get it over with.
Yeah, maybe it's like this. It's fun to unpack as long as I don't have to apply it to my... Wait a minute.
Right.
It's the application
if I can just talk to you about your problems.
Right. One of our absolute favorite segments on the podcast is what makes you smile about your husband or wife. I'm so glad that you share. And if you haven't yet, you can just simply email us, Tara, T-A-R-A, at behindoursmiles.com.
And today we're hearing from Allie, and she is sharing about her husband, Zach. And she says, every time he messes up, anytime he loses his temper or says the wrong thing, he always apologizes with true remorse, sometimes even tears. And I've always loved that about him. He is humble, and that draws us closer together. We have a lot of these messages that we've gotten over the years, and some of them are sweet and nice, but I like when it kind of cuts to the chase because a man who can apologize, that does make you smile. That goes a long distance.
I love the way that she put always in capitals too. He always apologizes. No, that's really true. There's a humility in apologizing. Together. And I do believe that it heads off or prevents the second horseman from entering the arena of our marriage.
We're talking horses today.
Yes.
So Joe and I, we've been highly impacted by the reading we've done by the Gottmans. And one of their core messages that they share is this idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which means there are 4 major behaviors that happen in relationships that when they start running rampant and unrestrained, they're like giant red flags. You're going the wrong way. Yeah. Then, the relationship dies. And I think it's not just that, but like Allie mentioned, your ability to form intimacy will be damaged the more that these horsemen run rampant. So last week, we talked about criticism, which is not just telling your spouse something that's wrong, but framing them as the problem and making your critique a personal attack. But followed close behind, its twin brother, if we are critiquing and being critical of each other, the other person is very, very likely to become defensive. Yeah,
the second horseman. And almost the second horseman defensiveness actually could come out of that criticism. Criticism could pull that forward in our relationship. So I think first we've got to look at what in the world is defensiveness, because I think sometimes, Tara, when I'm being defensive, I think I'm fully justified and I'm not being defensive. I'm just telling you how it is.
Well, we're feeling unjustly accused. And again, there are times that you can be unjustly accused, but it's that feeling. You mentioned being justified, right? We feel like we're justified and we're right. And ultimately, it is a form of self-protection. So you're leveling attack at me, and whether, again, it's a justified attack or not a justified attack, maybe it is a personal attack, we immediately have to defend ourselves. And it's whatever you're saying, I'm not even listening to it. So it's a pushing away of each other too.
Yeah, it almost like our excuses basically tell each other that we don't take your concern. I'm not taking your concern seriously.
That's not me, right? So like criticism means you're the problem, and the defensiveness is, well, I'm not the problem.
Right. Which leads to a vicious cycle and circle of conflict. I also think that defensiveness is a denial of responsibility.
In the end, that's the core of it.
Right.
Don't expect me to fix this.
Yeah, even though it's my problem.
Yeah,
right?
Or don't expect me to be any part of the solution. It's not me. All I know is it's not me. And it's like that criticism comes bouncing off you and just you propel it right back in the form of defensiveness. So, shifting blame back and forth.
Yeah, because I've noticed even in our marriage, and I'm pretty sure this is pretty well true everywhere, Defensiveness is really just a way of blaming you. If I'm feeling like I'm being criticized or being blamed, then I can shove that blame back.
Because there's a problem somewhere. It's not enough to say that, hey, that's not my problem. Or because there are times that you could be unjustly critiqued for sure. And you say, oh, that wasn't me, teacher. I didn't do it, right? Who, did this in the classroom? It wasn't me. That's not defensiveness so much as going, it definitely is someone else's problem, and just wanting to shift all responsibility. And obviously, as we're talking about within a conflict within your marriage. So something has happened wrong, your feelings have been hurt, something has been miscommunicated, and there's a problem in your relationship. And a relationship is two people sort of trying to work things out together. So this has been an issue in our marriage, and we'll take it both ways. However,
wait,
you take the next part.
Anytime you say however. Wait. No, I want you to keep going. Are you going to say I tend to be more defensive?
Oh, exactly.
Or is that where you're going?
I was going to say that.
Well, I'm going to get defensive here in a minute.
So, but we've
worked through this, but we're not past it.
We're not past it.
We're still
I feel
working
like
on
from
it.
my end, you are way past it. How about that?
I'm less defensive.
You're less defensive.
Okay.
So I didn't even recognize at the time when you're very defensive. Now, I think defensiveness and criticism are often hand in hand. So I will say, at some of our situations when I had to call you out on behavior that I didn't like, I was critiqueful and demeaning in the way I spoke of those shortcomings. So then I'm not helping myself by doing that, because then you've been on the defensive. Other times I literally just said, hello, honey. And you're like, well, it's not my problem. And I'm like, I wasn't even saying anything about you. Yeah. And it wasn't till we were in a healing spot in our marriage where you realized where that source of defensiveness was coming from. I didn't even finish my sentence, and you're like, stop blaming me. You were sensitive to that critique where you almost could hear it everywhere, whether or not I was being truly critical or not of you.
And that's why I think it's important to understand what we bring into our marriage, right? Understanding our family of origin and understanding the things that we walk through and how that affects our marriage. There were times when you had a very similar tone. It wasn't even a bad tone. It was your tone, but it was similar to a tone of a very critical person in my past. And so that's what I heard in those first couple of words. And then I would become defensive. And I do appreciate what you said about healing, because that really, the healing process is the key, surrendering it to God and allowing Him to help us walk through it. And it's a lot of hard work, but as we walk through that, we begin to see that ground being gained. And one of the things that I really began to realize is that defensiveness doesn't solve the problem, number one. In other words,
shifts it around.
It does. It moves it around and it prolongs it. So if we're trying to solve a problem and I'm defensive, it just makes it last so much longer.
And this was almost for us, even like years and years and years and years of us trying to get to a core issue. But I think what we took away from that, especially for you, coming from an extremely critical household, extremely abusive family environments, many of them, that I could have a legitimate complaint against you. Hey, Joe, you're not listening to me all the way. Or, Joe, I tried to explain this to you and you're dismissing this, or whatever legitimate relational issue. Like, hey, would you please do this? This is a problem for me. And the walls go up, the self-protection goes up. What do you mean? Defensive. I didn't do that. It wasn't me. Or I'm not sure what the words you used were, but you never engaged that complaint. You never engaged it with me. It was just like, don't say it. And it wasn't till, and you could probably rephrase this in your own words, this idea of going, I'm healed now. And if I admit that I have a problem, that I mistreated you, if I admit that actually I take responsibility, then maybe all the people in my past that said you're the problem, maybe they're right. Maybe I am the loser in this relationship. So you had such an obstacle to overcome with that.
And we need to camp out here for just a moment, because I really believe that far more people struggle with that than they realize. I didn't even realize.
Right. It was a long time.
I was struggling with that. This idea that and I don't know if I wasn't smart enough or just not healed enough to really recognize it, not surrendered enough is a great point. But if Tara is right about this thing, because again, I wasn't hearing the issue.
You legitimately hurt my feelings.
I wasn't hearing that you were having a problem with the issue. I was hearing you were having a problem with me. And if I admit that that is right, that means everybody who said all those things about me were also right.
All
and
the
if
other things that were said about you.
And if that's right, now it's hopeless. And so depending on how you grew up, if your family origin was very critical, or if you just felt like you could never please your parents or the people in your life that should be proud of you, you could never get to there, then that's going to show up until it's dealt with and until healing begins to happen. And for me, I was also running away from healing because of pride. I didn't want to believe that I still had to work at healing. And so all of that was this vicious circle. But again, coming back to this point, if I'm hearing you say there's something wrong with you, and I allow and I accept that, then everybody else was right. And really, I mean, it is so defeating and discouraging and disheartening when you get into that place.
Something's wrong with me.
Yeah. And only in healing process did I begin to rise above that to realize, wait a minute, what God says about me trumps anything that anybody ever say about me. And then started to be able to give you benefit of the doubt to say, okay, if my shoes are left out, doesn't make me a bad person. It only means that we have an issue with the shoes.
And I mean, and I'm referring to issues that are not just like little annoyances of shoes. I'm talking about like in the relational, like, okay, the words you spoke or the attitude you gave me or when you were short with me and when you, when you didn't listen completely to my concerns and dismiss them, like stuff that's a little bit more personal. When we bring that up, and again, vice versa, when you bring that up to me to say, hey, what you said was hurtful, how you treated me was hurtful. And again, it can be put in a better package or in the package of criticism. But the immediate thing to say, you did something wrong and you blew it, because sometimes we do blow it. Like, yeah, I knew better. I should have done better, and I didn't. And learning to own that, I think, is just such a huge obstacle, because I think we then go to black and white thinking. Either defensiveness is I'm 100% innocent, right? Like, okay, I am the perfect angel who's never had an evil thought or an evil motive in my life. So how dare you accuse me? Then we go black and white thinking, or your way, which was, well, you're right. I'm miserable, useless, pointless. And I'm like, no, I think that's what we landed on. You're like, well, that's it. I'm the hugest problem in the world. It's all my fault. Everything that's ever happened wrong in the world is my fault. And you kind of owned the weight of everything. And that's not healthy either. And
it wasn't, I want to clarify there real quick, because it wasn't even something that I was speaking. Like, it wasn't something that I was using as a manipulation piece. It was something that I was actually carrying, didn't realize it, and had to really get before God in that healing process to understand these things that happened as a child are really infecting our relationship today. And if I don't pursue healing with God's help, and that's being surrendered to Him and putting my pride aside, then this is going to continue to be a vicious loop. Because defensiveness is still a form of self-protection. Right. So you're saying I'm responsible for protecting myself and my sense of identity, instead of, in who we are in Christ, and saying, hey, I will make mistakes. I will sin against you, Joe. And when you bring that up to me and you talked about that, I don't have to protect my sense of identity. I'm secure in that. And I can own my behavior. I don't have to own your behavior. I don't have to own the world's behavior. I don't have to say everything is my fault, right? Like, oh, it's all my fault. No. What I did and what I said was wrong, and I'm sorry. And it's funny, it sounds so simple, we talk about it, but why is it that in practice, getting to that place could take you like years and years to just say, you're right, I did that, and I'm sorry, instead of going, but, right. But, because even in a complete I'm sorry, you can follow it with a but. Yeah. Right? Oh, and then I think defensiveness is a series of excuses we tell ourselves. This is why I am not responsible for my behavior. And what it does, and this is where I think it's even more damaging. Because what it does is it's very dismissive, right, of another person's pain. So when I am defensive... So when I say to you, honey, this would happen... This hurt my feelings, right? This hurt my feelings. I dismiss your feelings. I treat you as if they're not important, as if you're not valuable in that way. And it often, what it results is in more criticism, which then that criticism turns into more defensiveness, and it becomes this loop that is almost impossible to break free. Two horsemen just driving around crazy. Especially when you're unaware that it's happening. And that's why I really believe we both do, that you have to have great resources. You have to lean into the wisdom of others. And that's for us, the Gottmans, for instance. Some great books have been written by incredible people, but that's also getting before God individually and together and saying, I don't like this loop and I don't understand it, but we keep ending up here and we're not moving forward. How do we do this? And then allowing God to take it one step at a time.
Because even if I'm like legitimately sharing an issue with you, saying, hey, this hurt my feelings, I could phrase it in a way as if saying, you are the responsible for everybody's hurt feelings in the entire world. And so you could say to me at that moment, hey, honey, I feel like you're blaming me for everything that's gone wrong in your life or something like that. Like, I don't think that's a fair criticism. I don't think I'm responsible for every person who's ever cried. Like, let's bear this down to an incident or a phrase.
I didn't know my shoes were that powerful, or I didn't know that I could be that. Yeah.
So I think with defensiveness, though, it is this pushing away of saying, I don't want to look at the issue. I don't want to be considered any part of it. And just that pushing away. And I know it's so natural. I think it's self-protection to just say, but it's not my fault, it's your fault. But again, sometimes it's a response to an unfair criticism. If someone is attacking you for things that aren't fair, at some point you got to go, hey, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
But then it puts us in a habit of constantly saying it's not me.
But I also think defensiveness is a symptom of untrust. Deep, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like untrust in the big, huge word of the trust, but it's trust in the relationship aspect of, can I trust you with my feelings? Can I trust you with to be vulnerable with you? And I think when you're not experiencing full trust, and we struggled with this, a lot of what I brought into our marriage, and when you're not able to trust on a higher level, I think defensiveness is a symptom of that. With
defensiveness, we see it in our marriage first, but I know as we've been parenting, we see it too. So sometimes it's easier to see in other people. I think defensiveness, let me show you what you've done wrong. But I think it's that instant excuse making. You know, you didn't do what I asked. You didn't do this. And immediately, instead of going, you're right, I didn't do it. It's, oh, don't blame me. It was the dog. Don't blame me. It was my brother. Don't blame me. It was the weather. It was raining. It was snowing. It's like you see it so naturally show up, and as you're raising kids, and it's like at least for us, when I see that, going, oh, is that what I sound like when I'm being defensive?
Or sometimes you'll look at me and be like, that's your son.
So that was you 10 years ago.
Yes, that's right.
Like, I can't even get my sentence out, and it's like, well, let me tell you why you can't blame me. And again, I think blame is a scary word too, like this idea of blame, because blame is just an ugly word. I don't like it. But the idea of taking responsibility, and Joey, this is probably the top 5 things that have improved our marriage, was your shift to just saying, you're right. Not even sometimes you're right, but like, I own that. I said that. I did it. I'm sorry. And, you don't have to, again, take responsibility for all the tears in the world. Just the last 20 minutes that I've been crying.
Right. And even that, I may not own all of those.
But 18 minutes of that was you.
Yeah, and I think it really is important, because one of the things that I began to see as soon as I began to willingness to accept responsibility, and again, I'm not perfect at it, I know it, but as I accept responsibility, all of a sudden I see you as a person again, and not as a problem. And then also I began to go, whoa, okay, this last 5 minutes of defensiveness, that had to be hard. That had to be hard. And what caused you to have to come to me, that took vulnerability to say, I have an issue here, or I have a problem, or you hurt my feelings. And to be able to acknowledge that with you, to say, okay, I understand now. I am so sorry that my actions caused your feelings to get
versus
hurt.
You're too sensitive.
Right.
It's not my fault. Right. And if you just didn't this, it's not my fault. And to express that personal need and say, okay, you know what? I did that and I'm sorry. And I think this is where, as believers, we have access to this concept that we don't have to self-protect and make it all right and never accept blame. We can go, hey, we're going to sin. We're going to fall short. And when we offer repentance in a spirit of, true humility, just forgiveness, we don't have to be scared of taking responsibility for bad behavior. It doesn't have to define us.
Right. And it's so interesting how just accepting responsibility de-escalates the situation. It really does bring it down a notch, because all of a sudden, the first thing I notice is you soften up.
The defenses come down.
Right. Or vice versa. Because then it's like, well, this isn't worth fighting. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to fight if you're not going to fight back. You know,
Well, the defensiveness does go both ways.
Yes.
So you're defensive saying, I didn't do that. And so once you dismiss that and you're like, well, it's not my problem. I'm like, okay, I'm going to defend my angle. You don't understand where I'm coming from. And so clearly, let me tell you why I'm right. And I had no part in the problem. And so one of us has got to go, let's let the walls down. We can own, it's okay. And we tell this to our kids all the time. Just say it. Dad, I messed up. Okay, moving on. Like, as people, years and years and years and years and years and years and years, someone finally goes, you're right, I messed up. You're like, that's all we needed.
Yeah. And I've learned this. This is something that, and I don't always get it perfect, but if I will just accept responsibility, it is over so much quicker. It just drags out when I don't.
No, then I feel the same way.
But it does remind me of, we talked about this last week, but Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And when we're defensive, or at least I'm defensive, I just stir that up.
Well, defensiveness, it's
then
ugly.
we get to a point where it gets harder and harder to get back.
Right, because it's harsh, defensiveness. I mean, again, it just is not a pretty word. You don't ever compliment somebody by saying, wow, you're just so defensive. It's an ugly word. It comes from ugliness in our heart of having to self-protect. It doesn't mean we're not worthy of protection, but that we have to personally keep ourselves intact to make sure that no one attacks our sense of self, versus being real with each other to go, yeah, maybe you exposed something in me that I don't like. I don't like what you just exposed in me. And it's embarrassing and it's shameful. And I realize my own brokenness. So instead of being open with what you've just exposed in me, I'm going to double down on the defense and say, no, you don't see that. You didn't know that. Pretend you never saw it. It's all on you. And then you're the same way. Well, you just exposed in me what I don't want to be exposed. Versus when we know we're completely loved, accepted, ready through Christ, and we're allowed to repentance, we don't have to be afraid of that exposure, because we're like going, hey, it's covered.
Yeah.
It's covered. Like, we don't have to self-protect.
I think it comes back to pride, really. It is just that whole element of pride of, I don't want to be exposed. I don't want to be exposed to being less than I want you to think that I am. The more that we can be surrendered to God, the more that we can look at each other and share with each other instead of defensively at each other. I think the easier it becomes. It's not always easy, and I think humans, at least for me, it's that route to defensiveness is so easy. It's an easy road. It's a slope, and it's a lot harder to rise above that and simply say, I accept responsibility for this. And I think it's also very important to extend grace, because there are times when you may be critical or I may be critical because we're carrying a lot of other stuff, or we're struggling through, and that grace goes back to that Proverbs verse, right? A kind word,
gentle word.
Yeah, it turns away wrath. So I think
so.
that
What do we
grace
do in this
is really
situation?
important.
So there's the critical defensiveness loop, where there's a critical word said, maybe fairly or unfairly. We take it defensively, and that starts the loop of all that. But sometimes I had a situation where defensiveness comes up, and I'll say to you, you're so defensive. Now, is that an attack? Do you take that as an attack?
Sometimes, if I am defensive,
so you can just keep going.
So what's really funny about that is, if I am being defensive, I absolutely take it as an attack. But if I'm not being defensive, then I can say to you, honey, I'm really sorry. I don't even understand. I'm not really trying to be defensive.
So if you are being defensive, how do I call you on that?
That's very tough. That's very tough.
I think in my mind, when I've seen a little bit of defensiveness in you, or maybe this is the time that I've been defensive and you've handled it much better, to go, hey, hun, you don't have to be defensive. I'm not attacking you.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, I think you're receiving this as an attack. I'm for you. It's not a big deal. I still love you. You don't have to be defensive. I'm protecting you. Like, not protecting you, but I'm not out to hit your soft spot.
Yeah, when we've been able to execute it, it's been fantastic. And you have done really, really good at that, of right away recognizing, wait a minute, I think this trajectory is off.
I'm seeing
We're
a
heading
defensive
a
spirit
different
rise up.
direction.
Yeah.
This is not what I intended. And the other thing that you do that I think is really incredible is you will reach out and you'll hug me. And I've learned to do that for you as well. If I feel like, whoa, this is not where I thought this would go. This is not my intent at all. If I just hug you for a moment and maybe don't even say anything in that moment, but allow that, then all of a sudden one of us will start to share like whatever's going on.
I just, even like for you might be like, oh honey, I just thought for sure you were going this direction. And I was like, again, we do revert to self-protection. And in a marriage, we're here to support each other and protect each other. And Joe, you are a wonderful protector of my heart. And to be able to say when I feel like you're not going to protect my heart and you're not watching out for me, then I'm going to self-protect and be defensive and saying, hey, you can't hurt me like that. But if you can come to me and say, hey, honey, I'm here to protect your heart. Don't worry about me hurting you in this moment. Here's where my intentions are towards you. I was trying to say this to you. I wasn't meaning to come across as crucial, but we can't make the mistake of getting defensive so quickly. And we ruin a good thing just from mishearing it. I mean, how many times have we even like said something wrong? We just heard the wrong word. This is bleh. And you're like, how dare you say that? And you're like, honey, I didn't even say that. And it's like, why are you so quick to be defensive? And then it's on me to go, okay, why was I so quick to be defensive? That's my issue.
Well, and we used to do really well not so well actually, at finishing each other's sentences from and it would come out in something that we weren't going to say at all. Yeah. But it's like, wait, and then it would be like, well, why were you thinking that I was going to go that direction? So I think we've gotten quicker to recognize that we're going down the wrong trail. We don't get quite as far down the trail as we used to. And I think that's what the growth process looks like. It's not that it completely goes away. It's not that all of a sudden you're just perfect and you never have defensiveness or criticism anymore. It's just that we begin to recognize it sooner before we've spiraled
Look, and we can own
down this.
In the end, I think I've learned I can own what I've personally done wrong. Again, it's like whether it's 100% or 1%, I don't have to own your mistakes. I can own my own. There's repentance and forgiveness. But to recognize, to ask those questions with your spouse. Hey, honey, is something the way I'm communicating with you causing you to be defensive? And sometimes you go, oh, okay. Or
but be ready.
How do you feel when I talk to you like that? How does that make you feel when I use those words? And go, oh, okay. Sometimes it all starts to click.
That's a great question to ask, but I do want to warn you, be prepared for the answer that you get. Yeah. Because if I ask you, honey, why do you feel like I'm being defensive with you? I don't think it's okay for me to get defensive about your answer, right? I've got to be in a good spot, in a good place. But I do think that is a great conversation piece. And I do think those are some great questions to ask. And the other question is, because I really do believe defensiveness shows up as a symptom of a trust issue, and not the big trust issues.
Well, sometimes
talk about and sometimes it can be, yes, but I'm more referring to just trusting you with my vulnerability, or trusting you.
I'm thinking though, for you though, that along our way, we were able to realize that some of your defensiveness was a learned behavior. So it's almost like you're flinching.
Yes.
Right? If you've been hit over the head enough times, you're going to flinch when someone comes at you. So I think for you, you had a little bit of that flinching involved to say, an attack is coming. And so it took me a while in our marriage to kind of finally get that trust in your own healing to say, okay, Tara's not coming at me. Yes, for many years, it was an issue. But to recognize that, say, Tara, one of the reasons I'm defensive too is I'm still in that mode of saying someone's going to attack me. And it's taken me a while to remember that you're not my abuser, you're not my attacker, and I can trust you.
So maybe you're asking yourself, like, how do you enter that healing process? Like, how do you get to a place, especially if there's this loop that's happening and happening and happening? And so for us, this is really, number one, reading incredible material from people who are a lot smarter than us. But number two, being willing to have those conversations that you just talked about, being willing to sit down, whether that's at a restaurant over dinner, that's out on your back deck having coffee together, whatever it is, setting aside a little margin of time to ask those questions and to be okay with the answers, to say, okay, maybe we're not where we want to be, but this is where we want to get to. So if we can move the needle even in this direction, the right direction, then that's good. And I look back and I look at where we are now compared to where we were, and I see all the growth that happened. And I'm like, well, if I was perfect back, if I was where I'm at now, I'm not perfect, but if I were at now back then there would be no growth that would needed to happen. So if I could go back at all, I would just tell my younger self, relax a little bit.
Don't be so defensive. Right?
It's going to be okay. And then the other aspect of that healing, and this is probably the most critical, the most strategic piece, is prayer. We had to be willing to surrender it to God to the best of our abilities, to say, this is going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be worth it. It's not going to feel comfortable or all the time. And it's not that there's never going to be any pain, but we're going to work through this, and we're going to work through it together. And then I think Tara, you and I locked arms. We turned from looking at each other as the problem as to looking at the problem and attacking that together. So I would say those are some of the key ingredients that also helped with the defensiveness.
And again, you can't be defensive in your relationship with God. That will never work, being self-protection. And that's where it goes back to saying, God, you see me as I am, and I know that you have forgiven me for the ways I've fallen short. I know that you love me regardless of what I do, and that sense of security that you don't have to be, defensive with God. Okay, God. No, he knows. No excuses. He knows the truth. He can't pull one past him. But getting that place of being fully known by God and feeling accepted will also bleed into relationship with each other as well. So I love that. So those are the two horses that are running around right now. We're going to kick him out of the arena.
Criticism and defensiveness. We'll get to horse 3 next week.
Yes. Contempt.
So we're going to post some resources in our show notes.
I'll find some links for
so
something.
You can find those. Actually, we've already posted those. If you're listening to this, they're already there. Would love to hear from you. If you want to further discuss some of the things we talked about, got questions or just some comments, please let us know. You can email us anytime, Tara, Tara, at behindoursmiles.com. Your 5-star rating is huge. Your review is really appreciated. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.